Emily had not planned to marry again. At 42, she was content with her quiet routines, her work as a freelance editor, her small apartment filled with books, and the scent of lavender candles. But life had surprised her when she met Daniel. He was older, kind, steady in ways that made her feel safe, and behind his gray-blue eyes lived a sadness that only deepened her care for him. He was a widower, still carrying the memory of his late wife, and she never tried to compete with that memory. She only offered companionship, patience, and the kind of warmth two lonely people could share. Their marriage was simple. A courthouse ceremony, a dinner with a few close friends, and then the move into Daniel's large suburban home. That was where the new chapter began, and where Emily quickly learned it would not be simple at all. The house felt heavy the first time she walked through it. The walls were filled with photographs. Daniel's late wife smiling at the camera, their son Luke as a boy at birthdays and graduations, family vacations frozen in frames. Emily noticed how carefully everything had been preserved, as if time had paused the day Daniel's wife had passed. She respected it. She didn't touch the pictures, didn't rearrange the furniture. She wanted Daniel and Luke to know she wasn't there to erase anyone. She only wanted to belong, if they would let her. Luke, however, made it clear without words that she was an outsider. At 20, he was old enough to carry his own grief, but young enough that it weighed like a stone on his shoulders. He was polite, yes. He said hello when he passed her in the hallway. Thanks when she cooked dinner, but it was never more than that. He ate quickly, retreated to his room, and closed the door like a shield. Emily told herself not to take it personally, but at night, lying beside Daniel in their quiet bedroom, she admitted softly, "He doesn't want me here." Daniel would squeeze her hand, his voice calm but tired. "He's still healing." "It's not you, Emily. He just doesn't know how to let someone in again." She nodded, but the ache remained. She wanted to believe she could fit into this family, but every day the silence between her and Luke reminded her how far she still was from it. One evening, after Daniel had left for a late client meeting, Emily tried to reach out. She knocked on Luke's door, offering a plate of cookies she had baked. He opened the door just wide enough to take the plate and said, "Thanks," before closing it again. She stood in the hallway, holding the tray with a forced smile, her heart sinking. She whispered to herself, "This house isn't mine. I'm just passing through." Still, Emily kept trying. She cooked meals, left kind notes by the fridge, and asked about Luke's classes at the university. He gave short answers, never rude but never warm. She understood his distance. She could never be his mother, and she would never try to be. But the coldness cut deeper than she admitted. The hardest moments were when she saw Daniel caught between them. At dinner, he tried to bridge the silence with small talk. He asked about Emily's work, about Luke's classes, filling the gaps with stories from his office. Emily smiled and played along, but Luke only nodded and kept his eyes on his plate. Daniel's shoulders would slump slightly, as if carrying both their burdens at once. Emily hated that. She hated being the reason his evenings felt heavier instead of lighter. What haunted her most, though, was the house itself. At night, when Daniel fell asleep, Emily would wander through the rooms. The family photos seemed to watch her with eyes full of memory. The living room still smelled faintly of the perfume she imagined Daniel's late wife had worn. Every corner told Emily, "You don't belong here." She tried to bring little pieces of herself into the house. A vase of fresh flowers in the kitchen, a throw blanket on the couch, a book left open on the coffee table. But it always felt temporary, like borrowing someone else's space. Luke never commented, but his silence made it clear. This was still his mother's house. And Emily was a guest. One rainy afternoon, Emily sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the drops slide down the glass. She felt the weight of the quiet pressing in, and for the first time since the wedding, she wondered if she had made a mistake. She loved Daniel deeply, but love alone could not erase the ghost of a woman she had never met yet felt competing with every day. She whispered into the empty room, "I don't know how to do this." Her phone buzzed then, a message from Daniel. "Stuck at work late tonight. Don't wait for me for dinner," Emily sighed. That meant another evening of silence with Luke, another awkward meal where words would hang unsaid. She considered eating alone, sparing them both, but something inside her, some stubborn hope, told her to try again. She wanted, more than anything, to find even the smallest bridge to the young man who kept her at arm's length. She began cooking, filling the kitchen with the smell of roasted chicken and herbs. She hoped maybe the warmth of the meal would soften the edges of the evening. She set the table for two, arranging it carefully, almost nervously. When Luke finally emerged from his room, his headphones around his neck, he stopped at the sight. Emily smiled gently. "Your dad's working late. Thought we could eat together." Luke hesitated, then sat across from her. They ate mostly in silence, the sound of forks and knives louder than words. Emily tried to start small conversations, asking about his classes, about the rain, but his answers were brief. Yet, as the meal went on, she caught a flicker in his expression, a softness that hadn't been there before. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night, when Emily lay awake, she thought about the dinner. It had been quiet, awkward, almost painful, but Luke had stayed. He hadn't disappeared into his room, and for Emily, that small choice meant more than he knew. She whispered into the darkness, "Maybe there's still hope." The house remained heavy, filled with silence and memory, but beneath it all, something faint stirred. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was a beginning. Emily didn't know where it would lead, but she knew one thing with certainty. Her journey in this family had only just begun. The following weeks tested Emily more than she had expected. Every morning she rose early, made coffee, and set out 2 mugs on the counter, one for herself and one for Daniel. Sometimes Luke would come down from his room, headphones hanging around his neck, his hair messy from sleep. He would grab cereal, pour milk, and leave without a word. Emily watched him, wishing for something simple, a good morning, even a smile. But silence seemed to follow him everywhere. Daniel, busy with work, often left before Luke even stirred, which left Emily alone in the kitchen with the quiet. She busied herself with editing projects on her laptop, making meals, cleaning the house, but she felt the absence of connection more with every day. A home wasn't just walls and furniture. It was the warmth between people. And here, that warmth felt locked behind a door she couldn't open. One Saturday afternoon, when Daniel was out running errands, Emily tried again to reach Luke. She knocked on his bedroom door lightly, hearing faint music inside. "Luke?" she called. He opened the door just a little, his expression neutral. Emily held up a plate of brownies she had baked. "I made these. Thought you might like some." He accepted the plate without much reaction. "Thanks." The door closed again before she could say more. Emily stood in the hallway, holding back a sigh. She had read somewhere that grief made people build walls, and Luke's were higher than any she had ever seen. She whispered to herself, "One day at a time." That evening, Daniel noticed her quiet mood. They were sitting together on the couch, the television flickering with some old movie. He placed his hand over hers. "You're trying, Emily, I see it. He just needs more time." She forced a smile, though her heart was heavy. "How much time?" she asked softly. Daniel didn't answer. Days blurred into one another. Emily and Luke circled each other like strangers under the same roof. At dinner, Daniel's voice filled most of the space, asking about work, school, the news. Emily contributed where she could, but Luke's replies stayed short, and his eyes rarely met hers. She began to notice how often he glanced at the framed photographs on the wall. His mother smiling in every picture, her presence lingering in every corner of the house. Emily wondered if Luke thought she was trying to replace her, though she never would. The idea made her chest tighten. One rainy evening, Emily decided to take a different approach. Instead of forcing conversation, she tried sharing something of her own life. Over dinner, while Daniel was away again, she said, "When I was in college, I used to spend hours in the library, not just studying, but escaping. Books felt safer than people sometimes." She gave a small smile, waiting to see if he would respond. Luke looked up briefly, his fork pausing. "Yeah?" he said, almost surprised. Emily nodded. Yeah, they made me feel less alone. For a moment, she thought he might say something more. But then he lowered his eyes and returned to eating. Still, she caught a flicker in his gaze. Curiosity, maybe even recognition, that made her heart lift a little. Later that night, as she washed the dishes, she thought about that tiny exchange. It wasn't much, but it was the first time Luke had reacted to something personal she shared. It reminded her of a door slightly ajar, just enough to glimpse what was inside. The next week, she noticed Luke sitting on the back porch, staring at the rain. She hesitated, then stepped outside, wrapping her cardigan tighter around her. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. He shrugged, which she took as permission. They sat in silence, listening to the steady fall of rain on the roof. Emily didn't push for words this time. She just sat beside him, letting the quiet be something they shared rather than something that divided them. After a long moment, Luke spoke, his voice low. "My mom used to sit here when it rained. She liked the sound." Emily's breath caught, but she answered softly, "She must have been someone very special." Luke's eyes stayed on the rain, but he nodded. That was all. Yet for Emily it was a breakthrough. He had chosen to share a piece of his memory, and that meant trust was possible. But just as hope began to grow, another challenge appeared. Daniel announced that his job would require him to travel more in the coming months. "It's nothing long-term," he reassured Emily. "Just a few days here and there." Still, she felt uneasy. Daniel had been the bridge between her and Luke, however fragile, and without him home, the weight of the silence might crush her efforts. The first evening Daniel was away, the house felt different. Too large, too quiet. Emily cooked a simple dinner, setting 2 plates at the table. She waited, but Luke didn't come down. After a while, she carried a plate to his room and left it outside the door. She whispered, "Good night," and returned to the empty dining room. The loneliness pressed in that night. Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she would ever truly belong here. She thought of leaving sometimes, packing her things and retreating to the life she had before. But the thought of abandoning Daniel, of giving up before she had really been given a chance, felt wrong. She loved him too deeply for that. The next morning, however, something unexpected happened. Luke came into the kitchen while she was making coffee. He picked up the empty plate she had left by his door and set it on the counter. "Dinner was good," he said quietly. Emily turned, surprised, a smile tugging at her lips. "I'm glad you liked it," she replied. It was a short exchange, but her heart swelled. Slowly, the rhythm between them began to shift. Luke still spent most of his time in his room, but he stayed a little longer at dinner, asked for seconds when she cooked meals he enjoyed, and once even offered to help carry groceries from the car. These small gestures gave Emily strength to keep trying. She told herself, "He doesn't have to like me today, but maybe tomorrow." Yet beneath the fragile progress, she sensed a question building, something Luke wanted to ask but hadn't yet. She saw it in the way he sometimes lingered in the doorway when she read in the living room, or how his eyes searched hers for longer than usual before he looked away. She didn't know what he was holding back, but she could feel the moment approaching, like a storm on the horizon. For now, Emily held on to the hope that one day the silence between them would break into something real. She didn't know when or how, but she felt certain the night would come when Luke finally asked her the words he had been keeping inside. Emily woke that morning with a restless feeling she couldn't explain. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that made every sound louder. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Daniel had left early for another work trip, and it would just be her and Luke again for the next 3 nights. She tried to shake off the unease, telling herself it was only nerves, but deep down, she knew something was changing between her and Luke. She could feel it, though she couldn't yet name what it was. The day passed slowly. Emily worked at her desk, her eyes scanning lines of text she was supposed to edit, but her focus slipped often. She found herself listening for footsteps upstairs, for the sound of Luke moving around. In the late afternoon, she cooked dinner, a simple pasta with fresh herbs. When she called him down, he came, sat at the table, and this time he didn't eat in silence. "This is good," he said almost shyly. Emily looked up, her heart lifting. "Thank you," she answered softly. For a moment their eyes met, and there was something there, recognition, maybe even gratitude. They ate quietly after that, but the silence wasn't heavy this time. It felt like a shared pause instead of a wall between them. After dinner, Luke surprised her. Instead of retreating to his room, he lingered. "Do you want help with the dishes?" he asked. Emily blinked, caught off guard. "That would be nice," she said with a smile. They worked side by side at the sink, the clinking of plates filling the air. It was such a simple moment, yet it felt enormous to Emily. She thought, maybe we're finally finding our way to each other. Later that night, as rain began tapping gently against the windows, Emily curled up on the living room couch with a blanket and a book. To her surprise, Luke entered the room and sat down on the opposite end of the couch. He didn't bring a device, didn't put on his headphones. He just sat, his eyes on the window where the rain streaked the glass. The closeness felt new, fragile, but it filled Emily with quiet hope. Minutes passed before he spoke. His voice was low, uncertain. "Do you ever feel like you're living in someone else's life?" Emily set her book down, giving him her full attention. "Yes," she said softly, the truth slipping out before she could hide it. Luke turned his head, studying her. "You do?" She nodded. "All the time, Luke. When I moved here, everything already belonged to someone else. The pictures, the memories, the way things were done. I've tried to fit in, but some days I feel invisible." He didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, then back at her. I thought you were trying to replace her." Emily's chest tightened, but she met his eyes. "I could never replace your mom. I wouldn't even try. She'll always be part of this house. Part of you. Part of your dad. I just hope one day you'll see me as someone who cares about you in my own way." The room went quiet again, but it wasn't empty. Something had shifted. Luke's expression softened, and for the first time, Emily saw not just a grieving young man, but someone reaching for understanding. He leaned back against the couch, exhaling slowly. "I don't hate you," he said suddenly, almost as if confessing. Emily felt her throat tighten. "I never thought you did," she whispered, though the truth was she had feared it every day. The rain outside grew heavier, the sound filling the silence between them. Emily wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders, unsure if the moment was over or just beginning. Then Luke spoke again, his words trembling but steady. "Can I ask you something? Something I've been wanting to ask for a while?" Emily's heart pounded. She leaned forward slightly. "Of course. Ask me anything." He hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the photographs on the wall, then back to her. Do you ever feel like you could care about me? Not as a mom. I don't want that. But as something else? Someone who's here? Not someone who's gone?" Emily froze. The question hung in the air, fragile and heavy at the same time. She searched his face, realizing how much courage it must have taken for him to say those words. She felt the room tilt with the weight of it. Her breath caught, and for a moment, she didn't know how to answer. Her heart whispered that she did care, deeply, more than she had admitted even to herself, not in the way of replacing his mother, but in a way that surprised her, like he had become a part of her life she couldn't imagine losing. She felt the sting of tears in her eyes, but blinked them back, afraid to break the fragile moment. "Luke," she began, her voice soft but steady, "you mean a lot to me, more than I've been able to show. I care about you, not because of who you remind me of, but because you're you." For the first time, Luke smiled faintly. It wasn't full, not wide, but it was real. He nodded, as if her words had given him something he had been searching for. "That's what I wanted to know," he said quietly. The air in the room shifted then. The distance that had stretched between them for so long seemed to shrink, leaving behind something delicate, something new. Emily leaned back into the couch, her heart still racing, while Luke turned his eyes back to the rain. Neither of them spoke again for a while, but the silence no longer felt painful. It felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one neither of them had expected but both had needed. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the rain, and thought, tonight changed everything, yet deep inside, she also knew one thing. Daniel's absence was allowing truths to rise that none of them had faced before. And she wondered what would happen when he returned, and whether this fragile, surprising connection with Luke could survive the weight of it. The morning after Luke's question, Emily woke with her heart still unsettled. She had replayed his words all night. "Do you ever feel like you could care about me?" Not as a mom, but as someone who's here. It had been such a simple question, but it carried weight, like a door creaking open to a room she hadn't known existed. She cared about him already, but admitting it out loud had changed everything. The house was quiet. Rain from the night before had left the garden wet and shining, and a cool breeze drifted through the windows. Emily made coffee, her hands trembling slightly as she poured it. She kept wondering how she was supposed to act now. Would Luke regret what he said? Would he pretend it had never happened? Or had he meant every word? When Luke came into the kitchen, he looked tired but calm. He poured cereal into a bowl and sat at the table. Emily braced herself for awkward silence, but instead he looked at her and said softly, "Thanks for last night." The words hit her like sunlight breaking through clouds. She smiled carefully. "I'm glad you trusted me enough to say it." They didn't speak much after that, but the air between them felt different, lighter, easier. For the first time since she had moved into this house, Emily didn't feel like a stranger in Luke's presence. She felt like someone who belonged. The next few days followed this new rhythm. Luke lingered at the dinner table, asked her about her work, even helped with small chores. They didn't have long conversations, but the quiet no longer hurt. It felt shared, comfortable. Emily began to look forward to their evenings together, though she knew she couldn't let her emotions drift too far. She reminded herself again and again, she was his stepmother, Daniel's wife. She cared deeply, yes, but she had to keep her heart steady. When Daniel returned from his work trip, the balance shifted again. He was cheerful, relieved to be home, and full of stories about meetings and clients. Emily welcomed him warmly, grateful for his presence, but she couldn't help noticing how Luke grew quiet again at the dinner table. The conversations that had just started to blossom seemed to shrink back into silence. That night, when Daniel was busy unpacking, Emily found Luke in the living room, staring at the rain again. She hesitated before speaking. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. He gave a small shrug. "It's just, when he's here, everything feels the same as before. Like nothing's changed," Emily understood. Luke had opened his heart while Daniel was away, but now, with his father back, those fragile steps felt hidden again. She sat down across from him. "What you told me, it doesn't disappear just because he's home. It matters. It always will." Luke looked at her then, his eyes steady. "Do you really mean that?" She nodded, her voice soft but certain. "Yes, Luke, I mean it." It was the first time she saw him truly believe her. His shoulders eased, and a quiet relief settled on his face. Over the next week, something remarkable happened. Though Daniel didn't notice it at first, the distance between Emily and Luke slowly faded. Emily laughed more freely at the table, and Luke added comments, small jokes, even questions for her. Daniel often looked at them curiously, as if surprised, but he said nothing. One evening, after another quiet dinner, Daniel turned to Emily when Luke had gone upstairs. "He's warming up to you," he said with a smile. "I never thought I'd see it, but you've found a way in." Emily's heart swelled at his words. She had wanted nothing more than acceptance, and now, slowly, she felt it blooming. Still, she couldn't forget the night Luke had asked her that question. It lingered in her mind, not in a way that troubled her, but in a way that reminded her how much trust he had placed in her. He didn't want a mother. He didn't want someone to erase the past. He only wanted someone who saw him as he was, someone who cared about the person he had become. And Emily did. She cared more than she had ever expected. The final turning point came on a clear evening when Daniel was away again. Emily and Luke sat on the back porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air smelled of fresh grass, and the crickets had just begun their evening song. Luke broke the silence first. "I used to hate this house after Mom died," he admitted. "Every room reminded me of her. I thought no one else could ever belong here. But now, It doesn't feel that way anymore. Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to choose her words carefully. That means a lot to hear, Luke. I know I can't change the past, but I promise I'll always respect it. And I'll always be here if you want me to be. Luke nodded, his voice steady. I do want that. I wasn't sure at first, but I do now. For Emily, it was the moment she had been waiting for since the day she moved into the house. Not perfection, not instant family, but acceptance. A bridge had finally been built, not by forcing anything, but by patience, kindness, and the quiet honesty they had shared. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily thought about everything. The early days of silence, the heavy weight of photographs on the walls, the countless times she had wanted to give up. Now those memories didn't sting as much. She had found her place, not by replacing anyone, but by being herself. When Daniel returned home again, he noticed how different the house felt. Lighter, warmer, he smiled at Emily over dinner, squeezing her hand beneath the table. Luke smiled too, and for the first time, it felt like the three of them were not just people living in the same house. They were becoming a family. Emily knew the journey wasn't over. There would still be quiet days, moments of distance, times when grief resurfaced. But there would also be evenings of laughter, shared meals, and the small, steady growth of something stronger than she had dared to hope for. As she looked at Daniel and Luke across the table that night, she felt a peace settle deep within her. She no longer wondered if she belonged. She did, and with that, the story of silence, distance, and unexpected questions turned into a story of healing, trust, and quiet love. Sometimes the family we dream of doesn't come all at once. It grows slowly, like the gentle rain, until one day we realize the house is no longer filled with ghosts, but with love.